Think about the last photograph you took. Maybe it was a meal, a sunset, a face you love. You snapped it without thinking twice, posted it, moved on. Photographs for us are effortless. They're everywhere. They're cheap. They're disposable. Now imagine this. You are in a place where death is industrial, where it runs on a schedule, where the smoke never stops rising. You are forced to work in that place, to be part of its machinery, and you know that when you're no longer useful, they will kill you too. You have no rights, no voice, no future. And yet, someone hands you a camera, a small contraband device that could get you shot on the spot if discovered. You take it anyway. You point it at the horror unfolding around you. Your hands are shaking. The guards are close. You shoot from the hip, barely aiming, praying the image comes out. And then you hide the film in a toothpaste tube and pass it to a stranger, hoping, desperately, hopelessly hoping, that someday someone outside these walls will see what you saw. Those photographs existed. They were hidden, some for years, some for decades. And when they finally surfaced, they didn't just make headlines. They shook the foundations of how the world understood World War II. This is the story of the photographs that were never supposed to survive. This is the story of the people who risked everything so that history would have witnesses. And this is the story of what happens when images buried in silence finally find the light. Welcome to World War II Tales. Let's go back. Photography and war. An unlikely pairing. When World War II began in 1939, photography was already a powerful medium. The First World War had introduced photographic documentation to the battlefield in limited ways, but by the time the second one rolled around, cameras were everywhere. Military photographers embedded with units on every front. Signal Corps personnel recording landings, advances, retreats, and surrenders. Newsreel operators filming for the home front. Portrait photographers capturing soldiers before they shipped out. By the end of the war, historians estimate that tens of millions of photographs had been taken across every theater of conflict. The Pacific, North Africa, the Western Front, the brutal Eastern Front, where whole armies disappeared into snow and mud. The National Geographic Archive alone holds over 11.5 million photographic items from the era, many of which weren't even seen publicly until 2015 when archivists pulled them for the 70th anniversary of the war's end. But here's the thing about wartime photography. It was controlled. Heavily, deliberately, systematically controlled. Governments understood early on that images carried an emotional weight that written reports never could. A photograph of a smiling soldier was a recruitment poster. A photograph of a mass grave was a liability. A photograph of your own government committing atrocities was simply unacceptable, regardless of which side you were on. So photographs were curated, sanitized, hidden. The United States government hired photographer Dorothea Lange in 1942 to document the forced removal and internment of Japanese Americans following the attack on Pearl Harbor. Lange was already famous by then. Her image, Migrant Mother, had become one of the defining photographs of the Great Depression. She was skilled, she was trusted, and she was deeply personally opposed to what President Franklin Roosevelt's Executive Order 9066 was doing to nearly 75,000 American citizens of Japanese ancestry. She took the commission anyway, because she believed, in her words, that a true record of the evacuation would be valuable in the future. What happened next tells you everything you need to know about the relationship between power and photography. Dorothea Lange. When the government erases its own evidence, Lange photographed everything. She photographed children holding American flags being loaded onto buses. She photographed families standing outside their homes with numbered tags tied to their coats as though they were luggage. She photographed the confusion and the grief and the quiet, devastating dignity of people who had done nothing wrong, being stripped of their lives on the basis of their ancestry. The military commanders who reviewed her work immediately understood what they were looking at, and they didn't like it. Lange's photographs didn't show proud citizens making a patriotic sacrifice. They showed citizens being treated like prisoners. Her images were, in the words of one later assessment, evidence of something the federal government was obviously not anxious to publicize: So, they took them. The U.S. military seized Lange's negatives and prints, stamping some of them with the word "impounded" directly across the image. They were quietly deposited into the National Archives, where they sat in bureaucratic darkness, largely unseen by the public. Not for a year, not for a decade, for decades. The photographs weren't made broadly accessible until around 2006, more than 60 years after they were taken. A whole generation of Americans lived and died without knowing that one of the greatest documentary photographers of the 20th century had captured the internment camps in all their grim reality, and that their own government had locked those images away because they told an inconvenient truth. When the images finally came to light, they did exactly what Lange had intended. They became evidence. They contributed to the broader reckoning with Japanese-American internment that had already begun with the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, which issued a formal apology and reparations to survivors. The photographs gave that reckoning a face, a human texture, a weight that legal language alone could never carry. But as significant as Lange's story is, it pales in terms of sheer danger when placed alongside what was happening on the other side of the world. In a place called Auschwitz-Birkenau, where a small group of prisoners decided to do something so bold, so terrifying, so seemingly impossible, that it's almost hard to believe it actually happened. Auschwitz, the place that defied comprehension. To understand the photographs that came out of Auschwitz, you first have to understand what Auschwitz was, not in a clinical encyclopedic way. Really understand it. Auschwitz-Birkenau was the largest and deadliest of the Nazi concentration and extermination camps. Located in occupied Poland near the town of Auschwitz, it was a sprawling complex, not one camp, but several, spread across a vast area of flat, gray Polish countryside. At its peak, the camp held hundreds of thousands of prisoners at any given time. Over the course of its operation from 1940 to January 1945, more than 1.1 million people were killed there. Approximately 90% of them were Jewish. The killing was not chaotic. It was organized with a bureaucratic precision that is, in its own way, more disturbing than chaos would be. Trains arrived on a schedule. Arrivals were sorted on the platform, a process called selection, by SS physicians who directed people either toward forced labor or toward the gas chambers. Those directed toward the chambers were often told they were going to take a shower. They were given soap. They were told to remember where they hung their clothes. They never came back. The gas chambers at Birkenau used Zyklon B, a pesticide-derived chemical agent. Death came within 15 to 20 minutes. The bodies were then moved to the crematoria, where they were burned. The SS had engineered this system to be both efficient and invisible. The entire process was designed so that the outside world would never truly know what was happening inside those walls. And for a long time, the world didn't. The Sonderkommando, prisoners forced into the machinery. Inside the extermination process, there was a group of prisoners called the Sonderkommando, a German term meaning special detachment. These were Jewish inmates whom the SS forced to assist in the operation of the gas chambers and crematoria. They removed bodies from the chambers. They cut hair, extracted gold teeth, sorted belongings. They fed the furnaces. The psychological burden of this work is almost impossible to articulate. These were not willing participants. They were prisoners under the constant threat of death, forced to participate in the murder of their own people. Many of them knew that their own survival was temporary, that the SS periodically liquidated the Sonderkommando to eliminate witnesses, replacing them with fresh prisoners. They were, in the most terrible sense, witnesses who were not supposed to survive. And yet, in August 1944, a small group of Sonderkommando members decided to do something extraordinary. They decided to take photographs. The camera, the risk, and the 4 shots. The camera was smuggled into the camp through the Polish resistance network operating inside and outside Auschwitz. Getting a camera into the camp at all was an almost suicidal risk. Discovery meant immediate execution, not just for the person caught with it, but potentially for everyone around them. The man most likely behind the lens was a Jewish prisoner from Greece, usually identified only as Alex. though several historians and sources have suggested his full name was Alberto Herrera, a Greek military officer who had been captured and deported to Auschwitz. His code name was Alekos Alexandridis. Other Sonderkommando members, among them Alter Feinzelberg, known also as Stanisław Jankowski, and brothers Shlomo and Josel Dragan, along with David Shmulevsky, helped obtain and conceal the camera and acted as lookouts while the photographs were taken. The images were captured in August 1944 within a window of 15 to 30 minutes. Alex could not raise the camera to his eye. That would have been spotted immediately. He shot from the hip, pointing the lens as best he could toward the horror unfolding around him, pressing the shutter and hoping. The result was 4 photographs. 4. That's all that survived. And yet those 4 photographs are among the most historically significant images in the entire archive of the Second World War. The first 2 photographs, numbered 280 and 281 by the Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum, were taken from inside one of the gas chambers, shooting through a darkened doorway or window frame. They show the cremation of human corpses in an open fire pit outside the building. The bodies are visible. The smoke is visible. The industrial scale of the murder is visible in a way that no written testimony had ever quite managed to convey. The third photograph, number 282, shows a group of naked women, photographed in the open air, just moments before they were forced into the gas chamber. They don't know they're being photographed. They are walking. Some look at each other. Some look at the ground. In a few minutes, they will be dead. This photograph is one of the only visual records in existence of this precise, specific moment. The last moments of a group of people about to be killed in a Nazi gas chamber. There is no other image like it anywhere in the world. The fourth photograph, number 283, shows trees, just trees. The photographer, still shooting from the hip, aimed too high and captured the sky and the birch trees that surrounded the camp at Birkenau. The camp even took part of its name from those trees. Birkenau means birch meadow in German. In a strange way, even this accidental image has meaning. Those quiet trees standing above a site of mass murder carry their own kind of testimony. The toothpaste tube that carried history. Once the photographs had been taken, the film had to get out of the camp. This was, if anything, even more dangerous than taking them. The Polish underground resistance operating inside Auschwitz had developed various methods of communicating with the outside world. Coded messages, smuggled letters, small objects hidden in the lining of clothing, or inside food containers. The film from the secret photographs was hidden inside a toothpaste tube. That detail deserves a moment of reflection. A toothpaste tube. Something so mundane, so ordinary, so invisible in the context of a camp where prisoners were permitted minimal personal hygiene items. Whoever conceived of this hiding place understood human psychology, that guards searching for weapons, for contraband food, for communications, would look past the ordinary. The extraordinary was hidden in the everyday. The film made its way to Stanisław Kłajczyński, a Polish prisoner and leading member of the camp resistance, who used the pseudonym Stokwo. A note accompanying the photographs was dated September 4th, 1944, and signed with that name. Through a chain of couriers, the photographs were passed to members of the Polish resistance outside the camp, and from there, they began the long, uncertain journey toward the wider world. The resistance wanted the photographs to reach the Allied governments. They wanted proof, undeniable visual proof, of what was happening inside Auschwitz. Testimonies from escaped prisoners had been reaching London and Washington for years, and while the information was known in diplomatic circles, the photographs were intended to force a response, to make the horror impossible to dismiss. Whether that goal was fully achieved is a matter of considerable historical debate. The photographs were in Allied hands before the end of the war, but the scale of the response they generated at the time was limited. The full weight of their historical significance was understood only in the decades that followed. Decades of silence. Why these images stayed hidden. After the war ended in May 1945, the world began the enormous, painful work of reckoning with what had happened. The Nuremberg trials, which began in November 1945, used photographs as evidence. Images taken by the U.S. Army Signal Corps at the liberation of Buchenwald, documenting the conditions the Allied forces encountered. 28 photographs from Buchenwald were formally admitted as evidence in the major war criminals trial, each one mounted, numbered, and authenticated. But the 4 Sonderkommando photographs from Birkenau occupied a different, more complicated space. They were blurry. They were imperfect. They had been taken by a prisoner shooting from the hip under conditions of mortal terror. In the immediate post-war period, when governments and courts were focusing on the clearest possible evidence, these 4 imperfect images didn't get the attention they deserved. They were known to exist. They weren't secret in the way Lange's photographs were secret, but they weren't widely published. They weren't taught in classrooms. They weren't shown on the news. They sat in archives, occasionally referenced by historians, slowly accumulating the scholarly attention that would eventually bring them fully into public consciousness. It wasn't until the 1980s and 1990s, as Holocaust historiography deepened and expanded, that the Sonderkommando photographs began to receive serious, sustained scholarly and public attention. French historian Georges Didier Huberman published a landmark study of the images in 2001 titled Images Malgré Tout, Images in Spite of All, that argued powerfully for their historical and ethical significance. His work helped catalyze a broader recognition of what these 4 blurry, damaged photographs actually represented. They represented an act of resistance, not with guns, not with sabotage, with a camera, with the absolute conviction that evidence mattered, that the world needed to see, that silence was a form of complicity. What suppressed photographs do to history? There's something worth sitting with here, something that goes beyond the specific stories of Lange's internment photographs or the Sonderkommando images. When photographs are suppressed by governments, by armies, by perpetrators of atrocities, it isn't just the images themselves that disappear. It's a certain kind of accountability. It's the human face of events that otherwise become abstract. Statistics, numbers, reports. 1.5 million people were killed at Auschwitz. That number is enormous. It is incomprehensible, really. The human brain wasn't designed to hold a number that large and feel it fully. But a photograph of a woman walking toward a gas chamber in the last minutes of her life, that is comprehensible. That is one human being, one face, one moment, and every person who looks at it understands what it means. This is why photographs get suppressed, and it's also why photographs, when they finally surface, have such extraordinary power. Dorothea Lange's internment photographs, when they became widely accessible after 2006, reignited conversations about civil liberties, racial injustice, and the capacity of democratic governments to commit abuses against their own citizens in the name of national security. Those conversations were not academic. They had immediate, urgent relevance in the years following September 11, 2001, when questions of surveillance, detention, and civil rights were front and center in American public life. The Sonderkommando photographs, examined with modern digital enhancement technologies, have continued to yield new details, new identifications, new layers of meaning. Historians and forensic specialists have studied every pixel of those 4 blurry images, looking for information about the location within the camp, about the individuals visible in the frame, about the precise sequence of events being documented. Each examination is an act of witnessing, performed decades after the events themselves. Each person who looks at those photographs and understands what they are looking at is carrying forward the testimony of a man who shot from the hip in a death camp, knowing he might be shot dead for it because he believed that the world needed to know. The legacy. Why this still matters. The Sonderkommando members who helped take and smuggle those photographs did not survive the war. The SS liquidated the Sonderkommando unit at Auschwitz-Birkenau in October 1944, just weeks after the photographs were taken in a violent uprising that the prisoners mounted when they realized they were about to be killed. Alberto Herrera, the man most likely behind the camera, was killed during that liquidation or shortly before it. He never knew if the photographs had gotten out. He never knew if anyone had seen them. He died without that knowledge. This is what makes what he did so extraordinary. He had no guarantee, no confirmation, no way of knowing whether the terrible risk he had taken had meant anything at all. He acted on faith, not religious faith necessarily, but faith in the future. Faith that history mattered. Faith that evidence could outlast power. And he was right. Those 4 blurred photographs taken on a stolen camera, hidden in a toothpaste tube, smuggled out of the most lethal place on Earth. Those 4 photographs are now among the most important historical documents of the 20th century. They are studied in universities. They are exhibited in museums. They are cited in courts and in classrooms, and in arguments about the nature of genocide and the responsibility of nations. Dorothea Lange's confiscated prints stamped impounded by the U.S. military because they showed too much truth. Those photographs now hang in galleries. They are part of the permanent record of what happened to Japanese Americans during the war, a record that helped secure a formal government apology decades later. The lesson is uncomfortable, but it is clear. The people who suppress photographs understand their power, and so do the people who risk everything to take them. History has a way of prying open the things that powerful people seal shut. It doesn't always happen quickly. It doesn't always happen cleanly. Sometimes it takes 60 years and a digital archive and a historian asking the right question at the right time. But it happens. The photographs that were hidden for 70 years are now part of the permanent record of humanity. The people who hid them are mostly forgotten. The people who took them, the ones who shook and aimed from the hip and pressed the shutter in the shadow of the gas chambers, they are the reason we still know what really happened. And the next time you pick up your phone and take a photograph without thinking twice, maybe think twice. Because somewhere, at some point in history, taking that photograph was the bravest thing a person could do. If this story moved you, if it made you sit with something heavy and important, please leave a comment below. Tell me which part stayed with you. Tell me what you knew before and what surprised you. And if you want more stories like this, stories from the corners of World War II that don't always make it into the textbooks, hit that subscribe button right now, because there are so many more voices from this war that deserve to be heard. The next story is already waiting. I'll see you there.